who went to medical school, but what I've done over the last 21 years is actually be in drug development in the pharma and biotech industry, and also work on diagnostics, which is diagnostic equipment for multiple different diseases. And what I want to really highlight for you in my career is when I went to medical school, I never imagined I would be now considered a gene therapy expert. That wasn't the traditional career path that most folks would have taught me at that point in time, whether it was my consulting physicians, whether it was my professors in medical school at Robert Wood Johnson or Rutgers, or when I trained at Mayo in Minnesota. This is not something people talked about, going into pharma, biotech, doing different things that are a very different approach to the practice of medicine. So consider my story as something out of the box, outside the bell curve, and something very different that you're not really going to be taught in medical school. So I'm originally from Sri Lanka. I came to the US in '87. Sri Lanka is a country that's gone through a lot of civil unrest over the years. I'm not sure if you guys follow what goes on in that part of the world, but that's kind of what brought me here to go to college at Rutgers, do biochem, and then go to medical school at Robert Wood. So I think the best way to kind of give you my story is start how I got into gene therapy and then work backwards, because hopefully you'll take some nuggets from the story, and obviously feel free to ask questions. So nothing's off the table, because I think one way medical students and others learn, especially when you're young adults looking for a career path, is be brave, ask the tough questions of people who seem to have done different things, and make sure y'all are willing to take some risk and get those experiences as well. Because in a young career, there's no right or wrong answer, because you can never really plan for the future as precisely as one would hope. So my exposure to gene therapy actually started in 2015, which was actually not that long ago. I was at Quest Diagnostics, which is the largest diagnostics company in the world, and I ran their medical function. They had 800 MDs, and it was quite an experience. I was doing very well there, but I got a call from a former colleague of mine, Sean Nolan, who was at that point just recruited as CEO of a tiny biotech called Avexis. And if you folks don't know much about Avexis, you should look it up, because it is quite the unicorn biotech, and it's what one would call in the biotech industry a 1 in a 10 lifetime experience. Okay, so when Sean Nolan called me mid-summer 15, he wanted me to go out to Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, which I think Jillian is quite familiar with, to Nationwide Hospital, Children's Hospital, to go look at some work that two researchers, Brian Caspar and Jerry Mandel, were doing in a horrible disease called spinal muscular atrophy. So I'm not sure if any of you have seen children with floppy baby syndrome, as it's called, but type 1 spinal muscular atrophy is a horrible, horrible disease. 95% of children in the first 2 years of life either do not survive or are on permanent ventilator support. So I went to Columbus, Ohio, and I met with these researchers. What I noticed were two simple things. One is they're an animal model. So I'm not sure if any of you are interested in basic science work, but they're an animal model called the Delta 7 mouse. And the model worked perfectly when it came to giving their gene therapy. All these animals were surviving way beyond expected timeframes. And they had dosed 6 children with something called the AAV9 vector, which gets into the central nervous system. And you'd remember in gene therapy right now, most of the time they use a viral vector to give the gene therapy, and trillions of viral particles are being given into the body to get the gene of interest into the cell such that they can produce the protein that's defective. And in the first 6 children, the early signals looked incredibly positive, and it translated 1-to-1 from the animal model into the human, which is, again, never normally seen. So on my way back to New Jersey, I called Sean and I said, I'm in, because I've never seen this in my career before. And I think we have a cure for a devastating disease. So there started the Avexis story. So I'll give you the very short version. So a group of us who are seasoned pharma biotech executives came together, restructured Avexis in 15. We took the company public in NASDAQ, okay, on NASDAQ in February of 16. So now remember, I'm a physician by training, but here I am now taking a company public as a chief medical officer. We took the company public at $18 a share. And we worked incredibly hard. So the work we did in 2.5 years before Novartis came and took us out or bought us out in April of 18 for $8.7 billion. And the reason I'm giving you the number is it's important for you to understand the financial aspects of what you all do as well, because many a time medical schools don't teach you business of medicine, okay? Which I think has always in the past been a huge weakness of that, because most doctors don't know how to practice medicine. Don't know how to practice business. They know how to take care of patients, but no one teaches you contracts. No one teaches you how managed care deals with you, how CMS deals with you, how patients manage their finances when it comes to copay. So anyway, in my 2.5 years at Avexis, we did some things which I thought were remarkable that takes most companies 10 years to develop a drug. So we did a very aggressive compressed development program where this product, AVXS-101, which is now called Zolgensma, works wonderfully in these kids. And we also now have probably 1,000 patients treated with this, given it's a rare disease. And in kids who are pre-symptomatic, i.e. born without symptoms, it appears to be a cure. Now, I hesitate to say a cure, but these children are now developing without any symptoms, which again is remarkable given how aggressive this disease is. And that set the stage for my rest of the career after 18, where once we sold the company, I exited. And I went on to become a biotech entrepreneur. So I'm considered a gene therapy expert internationally. I sit on multiple boards. As Jillian said, I invest in a lot of startups, given I understand the technology and the science. And recently, we also, over the last 1 year, created a company called Jaguar Gene Therapies. And now we are working on diseases like galactosemia, which some of you may know of, autism spectrum disorders, which I'm sure you know of. We are working on type 1 diabetes, and a very complex group of diseases called ciliopathies, which is one of them is Bardet-Biedl syndrome. Again, rare, ultra-rare diseases. So my career, though, has been fascinating because the whole setup to get to gene therapy, I had to go through a lot of interesting experiences previous to that for 15 years, where I spent time at companies like Pfizer, Novartis, Daiichi Sankyo, and even Reata, which is another very interesting biotech company that's very successful in different diseases, including Friedreich's ataxia and Alport syndrome. And I did multiple roles. Obviously, I started off as a medical director at Pfizer in 2001 and worked my way up the career path, doing lots of different things, including drug development, some basic science work, medical affairs, actually commercializing products. I've commercialized multiple products. But on top of that, what I've also had to do is not every drug program is successful. So I'm not sure if you folks realize that for every 10,000 molecules identified in a lab, whether it's an academic center or in a corporate lab, which many companies do have labs, only one product eventually makes it to market. So drug development is a very high-risk game. It's like going and playing craps actually in Las Vegas. That is how poor the odds are when it comes to actually developing drugs. Gene therapy tends to be better, but again, it's not a simple process. So what happens is when you're exposed to the corporate pharma sector, always remember that there are many physicians who work for companies, whether it's a pharma company, biotech, or diagnostics, but also many of these companies are now looking for physician leaders who have both the science background, but also the business savvy to come in and eventually take over companies and run them as CEOs or senior leaders, for example, like what I do. And to get there, though, not only do you have to be open to lots of different experiences, but you also have to be open to taking some calculated risk. So, and frankly, that's my entire career, is basically having to make some calculated risk, being willing to change careers, or change companies. So there is nothing wrong over time in when you see a good opportunity that you can move on, as long as it's a vertical opportunity. It helps build your experiences further. But also you use those business experiences to frankly transform lives. So if you think of the work that pharmaceutical companies and even biotech companies, the gene therapy world actually do, is they do change patients' lives, and not one patient at a time, but communities as a whole. Because a lot of these patients in the rare disease space, it's not just the patient, but it's the entire family who suffer through a terrible diagnostic dilemma before they figure out what's going on with their child, and then they find there's not even a treatment available. So, and I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with treating one patient at a time, which is absolutely essential. We all need excellent physicians to take care of ourselves and our families, but then you also need excellent drug development that takes place at a pharmaceutical or sponsor level, and frankly, at academic centers. Many academic centers do a lot of work in identifying molecules, that can make a difference in patients' lives, but they are not able to do the whole drug development regulatory process to get it through the FDA or EMA or PMDA in Japan, and then eventually get it to patients. That's what companies do. So pharma academic collaborations, tend to be critical. So now I've kind of given you a very quick snapshot of my 21-year career in pharma, biotech, and gene therapy. But now let me talk to you about the practice of medicine. So I started medical school in Sri Lanka, in 1984 December. Had to leave Sri Lanka in 87 because not only was I a minority there in that country where many of the minorities were getting attacked, but also the medical school shut down because of the chaos in the country. So when I came to the US, New Jersey, lived in Westfield and then moved to New Brunswick, Piscataway. I went to college first at Rutgers, did biochem, and did my 4 years of medical school at Rutgers. And then moved on, went and did my internal medicine residency at the Mayo Clinic, and then went to Arizona and practiced actually in Arizona for 4 years in the mid to late 90s. And the practice of medicine in the mid to late 90s was very challenging because California and Arizona were going through what I call the chaos of managed care, the heavy restriction of Medicare, CMS, when it comes to reimbursement. And frankly, also there were these organizations called MSOs, Management Service Organizations, FICO, MedPartners, FPA, and so forth, that were getting into the management of medicine by buying out practices, but didn't really set up the infrastructure. So in a nutshell, what was happening is many physician practices in California and Arizona were going bankrupt because they were not getting reimbursed appropriately. And it was very difficult to get through the whole business process of getting yourself reimbursed. So for example, in the mid to late 90s, let's say you see a patient on day one, even if you submitted a clean claim, you may not get paid for 3 to 6 months. So to pay your employees, you would actually have to have a line of credit with a bank so you could draw on those funds and pay your employees. And if you never got paid from your managed care plan, frankly, you got screwed because guess what? How are you going to sustain yourself, right? And usually given margins of practice of medicine, especially internal medicine, which was anywhere from 50 to 80%, the amount of money you took home was minimum. But thankfully, when I was in practice in Arizona, I also had a large diabetes practice, which is what took me to clinical trials. So Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Novartis used to come to me to get patients into trials. And because I was obviously, a fairly friendly guy, I got along with most of the pharma executives and eventually got recruited into pharma as a medical director. And from there on, obviously my career blossomed for multiple different reasons. And I'll tell you that one of the things that took me to pharma was what I saw when it came to the practice of medicine reimbursement really concerned me. And this was the late 90s. And the day I made the decision to join pharma was the day I was offered my partnership at the practice that I was supposed to become a full-time partner. And I turned that down and took the plunge into pharma. And a lot of folks at that point, my physician friends said, hey, you're going into the dark side. What exactly are you doing? And I said, absolutely not. I think Pfizer is a good company and it's going to make a big difference in patients' lives. And frankly, that's what I did. I worked on atorvastatin, Lipitor, which you guys are familiar with. I worked on multiple diabetes drugs, including, Glucotrol XL. I worked on metformin, the glucophage, when it was a branded agent. I worked on aliskiren, which is a direct renin inhibitor. I worked on Welchol. I can give you a ton of drugs I worked on, which I think have really made a difference in patients' lives. And that is what excites me. Can I continuously be involved in making people's lives better through pharmaceutical agents, which actually change people's lives and save people's lives? And I think gene therapy now has become my passion and commitment, where I truly believe in what I do. And to get here, though, hopefully you get a feel that a lot of things I had to make decisions on went against the grain, the norm. So I didn't practice medicine for long. I didn't stay in academia. A lot of folks did want me to stay in academia. I still get calls to come back and teach in academia as a professor because very few people have the gene therapy experience I do. And that's not something I want to do because I like being an entrepreneur. And part of the success is not just having integrity and always remember that whatever you do, whether it's practice of medicine or developing a drug, your patient is number one in your eyes when you deal with drug development. But beyond that, you have to have the ability to make friends and network. And then the other piece which is very important is tenacity. You never give up, because whether it's practice of medicine or whether you're developing a drug, many times these things fail. They don't work out the way you want to. But that doesn't mean you get discouraged, because you learn from your mistakes. You'd always remember, keep your eyes open, and always remember it's okay to make a mistake, because if you don't make mistakes and fail, that means you're not trying hard enough in my eyes, okay? And that's something I've learned. And then also, as I said, take calculated risk and be willing to be self-aware. Most leaders in the business world, including pharma and biotech, the ones who do very well, obviously you have to have a bit of a personality or an ego to take that risk, but you have to have the self-awareness, though, to know what you don't know. And you have to hire the right people, sometimes who are much smarter than you, to fill those gaps. And as long as you can motivate them, collectively as a team, you become very successful. So again, if you folks haven't really looked into the world of gene therapy, what you're going to find is the Avexis team, and that is my team and my peers who are part of the C-suite, who are pioneers in gene therapy. And now we are leading the gold standard when it comes to all things that are going on in gene therapy, which include companies like Taisha Gene Therapies, Encoded, Affinia, Jaguar, and so forth, Celiogen. There are so many companies that are at the cutting edge. And then if you're into gene editing, there are lots of companies in the gene editing space as well that I think will really change the way medicine is practiced probably 10 years from now. And given that many of you are aspiring physicians and medical students now, really start paying attention to what's going on in the world of gene therapy, because by the time you all become seasoned practitioners taking care of patients, you might actually have a toolbox in your clinic where you can pick your gene therapy of choice for diseases, which could include eventually for hypertension and diabetes if cost of manufacturing comes down. So, so what I'm going to do is conclude this, my kind of preamble to what I've done up to now in the last 21 years of my career, is to say that number one, I have taken a lot of calculated risks to get to where I am. I have also made quite a lot of good friends at multiple levels. And when I say good friends, always remember to be humble. However successful you are career-wise, financially, whatever, always remember the guy who may be a doorman wherever you are, or the person who opens the door for you when you get into a cab, because all of them play a significant role in making sure whatever you do becomes successful. And I'm referring to even if you decide to form your own company someday as an entrepreneur, treat everybody fairly and well. And always remember, there is always an opportunity to work with people wherever you meet. So never burn your bridges. Do your best not to burn your bridges with people, whether it's your professors, whether it's your attending, whether it's your intern, whether it's someone who works for you, because you never know, someday you guys all may be together and that other person may be the one opening the door for you. So a lot of my career has also been people who've liked me, who've called me up and opened the door for me. And obviously I don't have time to get into how many there have been, but what it taught me is now I do the same for a lot of people. I try to open doors for them and help them. Mentor, career-wise, invest if they have a good idea, whatever. So my point being, going to medical school opens doors for you, not just to go and practice medicine or do academics. What I can tell you is you can do so many different things with the knowledge you garner. So I want to wish you good luck with that, everything you want to do. And as Jillian said, I'm always available to y'all. And after this discussion, Jillian can always put you in touch with me if you have specific questions, or once you graduate, if you do decide you want to go into biotech, and if there are opportunities, I'm always happy to help. So with that, I'm going to stop rambling here and maybe open this out so we can actually have an open discussion if you'll have questions.
So students, you can feel free to just jump right in. I don't need to call on people, just unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Nagendran. Thanks for being here today. So I'm curious to hear your opinion on what you think the next disease state that will be impacted by gene therapy? Or where is your head at in terms of what you're going to pursue next in terms of targets?
Oh, that's a good question, Ron. And I'm just curious though, which year are you in medical school right now?
I'm a first-year medical student, but I do have some experience. I'm a PharmD also from Rutgers. So I have some pharmaceutical industry experience and a little bit of CAR T-cell experience that has its own challenges. But yeah, that's my background.
Oh, okay. No, that's great. So obviously I'm a little biased when I respond to that question you asked, because at Jaguar Gene Therapies, we've already picked target diseases. One of them, which is called galactosemia, which is a metabolic disorder where there's a deficiency of an enzyme called GALT. We are also going after autism spectrum disorders, multiple genes that are impacted. So we're actually developing a mini gene to go after that therapy. And then something that I'm passionate about, given my core background is diabetes, and I'm a diabetologist by default, is type 1 diabetes. So we are really hoping we can develop a therapy for type 1 diabetes using gene therapy such that we can eliminate someday not only the need for insulin, period, but also the need for continuous glucose monitoring. So if you ask me, type 1 diabetes is something I really hope we can have significant impact on, because there is unmet medical need. But all the diseases I pointed out have unmet medical need, and then also ciliopathy. So through Jaguar, we own a company called Axovia that is looking at ciliopathies, the non-motile cilia. So not motile cilia, but the non-motile cilia that plays a significant role in intracellular signaling. And then to answer your question on CAR T, if you think CAR T was complex, so Novartis had a CAR T and they still have a CAR T therapy program, and they had manufacturing challenges that they've overcome. I'm very involved with a company called Celiogen that is thinking of developing something in that arena as well. So you should look them up, because down the road, who knows, you might end up having CAR T in a box at the bedside. And that would be perfect, isn't it? If you can do CAR T therapy in 24 hours when a patient needs it, rather than wait months to send it out to a lab and then get the drug or the therapy developed and then bring it back to the patient.
Yeah, I know a significant challenge was trying to make CAR T therapies that are off the shelf, quote unquote. So do you see similar challenges like that with gene therapy, or is that kind of off the shelf with the viral vector?
At the present time, one of the biggest challenges in gene therapy is manufacturing, Ron, okay? For lots of different reasons. Given that making the vector in large volumes is not easy, sometimes making the gene of interest is not easy. And then you also have technical components, which includes you have to have a pure product, and you also have to make sure the gene therapy that you're giving has the least possible empty vectors, because you don't want too many empty vectors without the gene of interest, because that obviously causes its own challenges, which I won't belabor. But like anything else, I anticipate in the next 10 years, all of these processes will be streamlined. Technically, the cost, I think, will come down, which means you can make the product much quicker, cheaper, and hopefully go after diseases where there are much more patients. So one of the reasons gene therapy companies go after rare diseases is the volume of patients are small. There's a significant unmet medical need, and obviously reimbursement then is not as much of a challenge. But eventually, if you develop a drug for, say, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, that's gene therapy, cost of goods have to be very low, because otherwise, you won't get reimbursed for it. So one of the challenges in general with any pharmaceutical product development is reimbursement and market access, which I didn't get into, but that becomes a skill by itself, which you have to really think strategically in showing the value of the product, such that whether it's a government agency, a state reimbursement agency, or private insurances will actually pay you what you would consider an appropriate sum, okay?
Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
Hi, Dr. Nagendran. Thank you so much for talking with us today. It's really interesting to hear your experience within pharmaceuticals and startups and the business side. So I'm wondering, I recognize that there are many opportunities to collaborate with academic institutions and basic science labs. However, I wonder if due to the competition within the pharmaceutical world, if this competition ever insulates you from collaborative work.
No, it doesn't actually. In my career, though, we've done a lot of academic collaborations. And a lot of drugs do, frankly, tend to be identified in academic labs, as you probably know. It's from a negotiation standpoint, everything is a negotiation, right? I mean, the academic centers obviously are not going to give up their IP, intellectual property, without appropriate contracting and reimbursement. And pharmaceutical companies know that if there's an early molecule that could be transformative, there has to be appropriate reimbursement and agreements with the academic centers to bring them in. And it's the competition, I think, is healthy. It hasn't become restrictive yet, but it depends on the academic center and the company you're working with. So if you ask me, my general statement is that people do collaborate and get a lot of things done, but some institutions tend to be a lot tighter on how much they'll share versus others. And obviously, if you're an academic center, you don't want to give away your intellectual property or capital away for free. And if you're a pharmaceutical company, you don't want to overpay for it. So it becomes, as I said, it comes back to a negotiation. But it hasn't hampered anything that's happened in the world of drug development. I mean, if you look at drug development over the last 10 years, I mean, it's amazing the number of good products that have come out for rare diseases and even for common diseases, right? So, and frankly, the US is far more productive than any other part of the world, purely because of the free market system and entrepreneurship, which is encouraged in this country compared to most other parts of the world.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
One question that came in through the chat is if you have an MBA and or how did you learn the business skills of medicine?
That's a good one. I'm happy somebody asked me that because, as I said, when I went to med school, nobody ever talked about the business of medicine. Nobody ever talked about the business of the practice of medicine. Nobody taught you how to negotiate a contract. So I'll give you a scary story because most doctors in practice will never tell you this. When I first joined a practice in Arizona in Phoenix, it was one of the most successful multi-specialty groups, 70 doctors. And when I joined them, my day one, the person who had recruited me told me, well, I've just resigned because I'm going to join Bain Consulting. I'm sure you guys have heard of Bain Consulting. It's a massive consulting firm. And I was quite taken aback. And then the next day, we had a group meeting where we discovered we lost a massive contract with our insurance company. So the company was this massive group got into a lot of trouble over that financially. And then I realized that none of the physician leaders in the company or the group actually read the contracts. So they were all signing contracts without reading them. So somebody else was reading them, i.e. it was the office manager who didn't have an MBA. And I still remember I told the senior managing partner, if you're not reading your contracts, let me start reading the contracts for you, because now you're making me nervous as an associate who's going to be up for partnership someday. I'm signing up to something that's very fragile. That is how I learned business, okay? So then when I joined pharma, same thing, as an MD, which was 21 years ago, a lot of folks are in pharma. The senior management told me, hey, look, you have an MD, go do an MBA. And just think about this, right? I was married, I had 3 young kids. I was working full-time on the plane all the time. And then on top of that, if I was going to do an MBA, I wouldn't have had a life. I would have just been completely buried. So I made a decision that I was going to learn everything I could from good mentors. So mentors in the pharma sector who are not physicians, but who are business people, very senior level business people. So I was very proactive. I actually went and asked people, hey, can I spend time with you on the commercial side? Hey, can I come learn about how you negotiate contracts with big insurance companies for drug reimbursement, etc. And I was a little pushy. I mean, and most of the people were kind. They would take their time to teach you. And also, don't forget, business savvy is not just being brilliant or in numbers or contracting. Business savvy is also your personality. So by nature, if you are shy, so to be candid, when I came out of med school, I was more of an introvert. I think like a lot of physicians tend to be. I love taking care of patients, but I wasn't the most social guy. I wouldn't go out there and interact with people, get to know people in a manner that I do now. I had to teach myself that. And that capability is an important capability to have to be successful in business. So just not having a brilliant mind in finance, but it's also getting along with people and frankly, appropriately getting people to do what is needed to be done for the business. That is being able to motivate them, give them the right incentives. And I can assure you, some of these things you'll never learn even at the best business school. It's hands-on experience, being good at what you do and having a curious mind. So my answer, long-winded answer to you is no, I didn't get an MBA. And at this point in my life, I don't need it. And I'm very happy I didn't go to MBA school because all my experience is real world hands-on experience, which I went after to teach myself. But should you get an MBA when you're young, if you have the knack for it and the time for it? Why not? You could do it. It might give you added skills that I may not have. But I think you can do pretty well without an MBA as long as you teach yourself business savvy as well, okay?
Another question that came through the chat: how would you advise medical school students to find mentors who are specifically interested in the intersection between medicine, business, and the pharma sector? And what would those kind of opportunities look like?
So I think one way to do so is maybe through your alumni office, like if folks like Jillian have their fingers on the pulse, right, of who's done different things once they graduated med school. And then Jillian and others can put you in touch with the right people who may be open to talking to you, like what I'm doing, mentoring you, and maybe even finding you internships and things like that that you can come and do. And it's not just pharma though. I'm sure, Jillian, right, there are graduates from Rutgers who've gone on to form multi-specialty groups, who've gone on to run hospitals, maybe senior executives at insurance companies, and maybe who have done alternative things like maybe now run a multiple slew of nursing homes. I guess what I'm getting at is the intersection of business and medicine is so vast now that it is, I think, more common than what it was 30 years ago when I was in med school. So you have to be curious. You have to reach out to your alumni network. You can go on LinkedIn and maybe Google Robert Wood Johnson grads, Rutgers grads, because I know there are groups. You can just do a Google. I mean, Google is pretty useful. You can just do, physicians in the business of medicine, and say Rutgers and see what you find. So I think you have to proactively look for those people and opportunities. And many a time, I think these folks are willing to help you. But you could also talk to doctors in practice, because you've got to get the other side of it for folks who graduated from Rutgers or other medical schools who are still in practice. And hopefully they'll be candid with you, some of the things that have worked for them and some of the challenges they have faced. And maybe even in academia, there might be professors in medicine who do pharma collaboration. And their point of view might be very different from mine, but it's good for you all to get everybody's different points of view. And then you have to make that plunge. Eventually, it's your decision, you make the plunge, and then you have to get your own experiences that will hopefully help formulate your career.
Oh, I actually have a quick question. I was just wondering, Dr. Nagendran, like how, and sorry, I came in a little late, so you may have already answered this, but I was just wondering how important you feel your residency and clinical experiences were to your current career in pharma, just because, I'm interested in eventually going into industry in some aspect, and a lot of my mentors have suggested, definitely getting residency first. And then there's some alumni who I've heard, didn't do residency and just went straight into healthcare consulting and those sorts of things. So, I'm just curious on your perspective on that.
That's a great question, and it's an important one. And something I didn't mention to all of you is there are a lot of MDs on Wall Street, by the way. So I work with Wall Street all the time, given that, I'm taking companies public, I'm presenting data, and frankly, they invest in my companies and our companies. And so my career path was a little more traditional in the sense I went to Mayo for training, and I find my 3 years of training there invaluable for some of the things I do, because I've touched patients and I practiced for 4 years after that. And my training is general, right? It's internal medicine. And actually that to me is advantageous because I didn't go and subspecialize. So what it does is anytime I take on a disease, I have to teach myself. So it's like a medical student again, right? I have to read the books, I have to read the papers, I have to call experts, talk to them. Sometimes I go and spend days in the clinic with an expert who treats spinal muscular atrophy, for example. So I know kind of what a patient looks like, but then I become a storyteller. So to answer your question, I'm a little biased because I think getting some clinical experience is a good thing, but then being able to translate that into a simple story so that you can explain to people, depending on your audience, whether it's academia, Wall Street, patient advocacy groups, or whatever, you have to connect the dots for them and help them feel and understand how bad a disease is for which you're developing a drug for. Now, your question also is, can you just finish med school and go straight into industry? Yes, you can do that. Can you take that and go straight into some kind of corporate role? Absolutely, you can do that. But I still strongly feel some clinical experience gives you that added advantage. Because I've interacted with some brilliant minds from McKinsey and Boston Consulting, and even Wall Street, MD, PhDs who've gone to Harvard, Yale, Princeton. But what I find them lacking is the ability to really translate it to the patient. So they understand the science beautifully and they can talk about the science, but the patient piece is somewhat lacking. So I guess what I'm saying is it's an extra few years of training, depending on whatever you want to do. But my answer to your question, though, is biased because of what I've done. So you should talk to somebody else who's gone straight after just an MD to do what they're doing, and they might have a very different perspective, though, okay?
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate your response.
I have another question about the funding when you are an entrepreneur for a small biotech or pharma company, but especially for biotech, it requires a tremendous amount of resources to even just get started on creating a therapy like that. So where do you seek funding? Do you go out to those like consulting and investment banking groups, or, you know, where do you get the money for it essentially?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ron. I mean, right now, thankfully, finding money is not hard. There's a lot of money out there on Wall Street and elsewhere, including outside the US, where money is just pouring in. So especially now with COVID, most of the world is in trouble. The US, thankfully, financially is doing quite well. So people have nowhere else to put their money, but it seems to be in the US, okay? So that's a good thing for this country. Your financing, though, you have to network. So if nobody knows you, it's that much harder. But if you've got your, let's say as a scientist, physician, you've got whatever work you're doing out there into the public domain by publishing, or maybe presenting at meetings, and people like your science, sometimes they will come to you. But most of the time, it's good for you to call people that you know. For example, let's say you have an idea and you don't know whom to reach out to. You could reach out to somebody like myself. And then I have a lot of people I work with in the world of finance and entrepreneurship and funds that will open their checkbooks if your concept is a good one. And then obviously you can always go to a bank like JP Morgan, Jefferies, Goldman Sachs, who have biotech investment arms that will listen to your pitch and maybe help you out. But on a more positive note, once you make money for Wall Street, their purse books are wide open. So given that what we do with the vets is we did make a lot of money for a lot of people. Now I can't stop people just coming and saying, here's a check. What are you going to do next? So my point is, at the beginning, it's tough. But once you do something that is transformative, and frankly, there's significant return of investment for the investors, it comes to the other point where you basically have to give them checks back and say, you know, we have more than enough money for what we do. Right now, we don't need any more money. So you won't know till you get out there with your idea. But this is a good start because, and you know, in a way, it's a good thing Jillian set these meetings up, because I'm assuming you get to meet a lot of different physician entrepreneurs. And those are names you want to save, because someday, who knows, 5 years from now, you might be picking up the phone and calling me saying, hey, I have an idea. What do you think? Right? You never know. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but what I'm saying is, as long as you have the network, it's not hard to find money. Okay, right now, as of today.
And a little bit of the follow-up, can you talk a little bit about the difference between getting like a money from a bank, let's say, and having big pharma merger or a partnership with a big pharma company as opposed to a bank?
So getting money from banks or funds gives you more control of your destiny. Striking a deal with a pharma company, which is a partnership, you give up some control because they'll usually put people on your board. Once you go through an M&A, frankly, you lose control. Most M&As, big pharma taking out smaller biotechs, eventually within 2 years, they put all their people on a board, and then frankly, you lose complete control. So what you'll find in most M&A activities with biotech is most of the founders leave within the first 6 months. So I was one of them. I left within 4 months. After Novartis took us out, I moved on because, essentially there was no point in my sticking around because the work was done. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how it generally seems to happen, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Jillian, you're on mute.
Sorry. Another question that came through the chat was whether you have worked on your own research or research directly.
Have I worked? So that's a really good question. So remember, I'm a clinician. I'm not a basic science researcher. So have I ever developed something in the lab? Absolutely not. Everything I've worked on has come from some brilliant mind somewhere, mostly in an academic center or in a pharma lab, in one of the research labs, like say Sandwich, England, for example, for Pfizer and so forth. My skill set is not doing the basic science work, but is taking the basic science work, looking at it and translating it into something big. So, because we look at multiple opportunities all the time, and some of us have that ability to say, okay, this molecule probably will translate into something like this clinically if you go do these experiments. So we take it beyond the lab, do the preclinical work with the right animal models, do the tox work, and then get it through. And then we design the first in human trials to show, hopefully, especially in gene therapy, some of these products are transformative. And something y'all need to know is with small molecule development, small molecules are pills usually, it takes a lot of time to get a drug to market because you do phase 1, 2, and 3. With biologics and gene therapy, if you have a transformative product, sometimes with the first in human trial, where you give the product to the patient population directly, and maybe if you have a natural history comparison, where you only have natural history in that patient population, you can compare your first in human trials to the natural history and get your product approved as long as you're putting the commercial product into the patient in the first in human trial. So I hope I answered your question. So in a way, my answer to you is I have never developed something in the lab myself, but the rest of the arena of developing it, getting it approved by regulators and commercializing it is the skill set I have, okay? And it's self-taught, by the way, it's experience over time. So I didn't go to school for any of that, okay? So.
Another question that came through was, why did you decide to pursue pharma? You mentioned medical reimbursement. Could you share more about that? Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll be very candid about it. Is my first 4 years in practice was an absolute nightmare. And don't forget, I practiced in the Southwest in Arizona when managed care was really taking off in the 90s. Reimbursement was terrible. So it was anywhere from 50 to 70% of Medicare. So they used to use Medicare rates as the gold standard. Malpractice rates were going through the roof. And also, what frustrated me personally was that I love taking care of patients, but taking care of patients when everybody else interfered in the practice of medicine, I found very frustrating. So for example, if I wrote a medicine for someone who I think needed it, I get a call from managed care saying, well, it's not on formulary, you've got to use something else. And I used to get very annoyed with them because I used to ask them, when did you guys go to med school? Or I admitted someone to the ICU for DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. I'd get a call from the medical director from the managed care company saying, well, you got to discharge the patient tomorrow. So I have the audacity to go right on the chart, call the medical director and have him come and discharge the patient. Because I guess what I'm saying, and it's still the same. I mean, things are frustrating when it comes to practice of medicine. So most young physicians tend to become employees now. When I practiced in the late 90s, we ran our practices. And most young physicians in general now don't like to run practices. They join groups, or they join huge organizations like Kaiser, or they join academia, right? It's a different environment. So my point is, I guess, if you have the instinct to be an entrepreneur and you want to be in charge of your destiny, I felt the practice of medicine didn't give me that opportunity. For number one, I couldn't take care of my patients because everybody else told me what to do. And I used to think to myself, why did I go to med school and go and train at Mayo, which was one of the most prestigious, training programs in internal medicine, to be told by people who've never touched a patient, this is what you should be doing for your patient. So I don't know if you guys feel that way, but that is one of the reasons I went into pharma when I saw the opportunity. And frankly, it's the best thing I ever did in my life. I mean, I've been involved with so many breakthrough products that have made a big change in patients' lives. It gives me some satisfaction that my years spent in medical school were worthwhile. So.
Any other questions from students? Anything else that you would like to share, Dr. Nagendran?
Well, I mean, Jillian, all I can do is, wish the audience best of luck and just be open to new experiences, take calculated risk. And if you guys ever decide to pursue pharma, biotech, or gene therapy, give me a call. Jillian has my contact info. And I'm on LinkedIn. So I usually do check my LinkedIn, every other day or so. And if you guys want to talk to me, I'm always open to helping you guys out. So all the best, okay? And have a good year. And thanks, Jillian, for this opportunity, okay?
Of course. Thank you for sharing your career and insights into breaking through into industry. And students, thank you so much for attending. I will definitely share contact information with you afterwards. So thank you, everyone, for joining.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Nagendran.
Sure. Take care. Bye.